when you really look at the traditional social contract we've all been handed, well, on paper, it seems perfectly rational.
Right, the standard blueprint.
Yeah, exactly. You trade the best 40 hours of your week, every single week, for like 40 years.
Handing over all your time.
Your time, your cognitive energy, your physical presence. And in exchange, this legacy 9-to-5 machine processes that time and spits out a mortgage, health insurance, and maybe a 401k that you just cross your fingers will outpace inflation.
If you're lucky.
Right. And that was the blueprint for the entire 20th century. But when you examine the current economic architecture, the math behind that contract it's fundamentally broken down.
Oh, completely. It's totally shattered.
We're looking at a blueprint for a machine that is structurally obsolete. And honestly, if you're listening to this, you need to wake up to that fact right now.
Well, it's obsolete because the core commodity of that contract, which is human time, is rapidly being decoupled from economic value.
Decoupled entirely.
Yeah. The entire premise of the middle class is built on this assumption that your capacity to process information, write an email, synthesize a report, or, I don't know, design a graphic, that it has an inherent stable market value.
Right, that someone will always pay you for that specific task.
Exactly. But when you introduce a technology that drives the marginal cost of those cognitive tasks to near zero, the institution of the salaried job isn't just like disrupted, it is structurally negated.
Negated. Wow. Which brings us to the core text we are tearing apart today on this deep dive.
It's a big one.
We've got our hands on a heavily circulated document titled AI Wealth Creation 2024, The Global Shift. And a mission for this deep dive is to look at the brutal reality this document lays out.
It doesn't pull any punches.
No, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
This isn't some speculative tech manifesto. It is an economic autopsy of the traditional job market.
An autopsy is the perfect word for it.
Right. The text argues that artificial intelligence isn't just another software update. It's not just a productivity tool to help you clear your inbox faster.
No, not at all.
It is the only functional escape hatch left for the middle class. The claim here is that we are standing at a highly volatile, completely unforgiving turning point in economic history.
And, the author makes a claim right in the opening pages that really sets the temperature for everything that follows.
Yeah, the big wealth transfer idea.
Exactly. They state that 2024 marks the beginning of the most significant wealth transfer in human history.
In human history.
Right. And we have to be precise with our terminology here. A wealth transfer is entirely different from wealth creation.
How so? Like, what's the distinct difference for the listener?
Well, when the internet was commercialized, we saw massive wealth creation. We had entirely new markets, new industries, new consumer bases just springing into existence out of thin air.
Growing the pie, basically.
Growing the pie, exactly. But a transfer implies a zero-sum mechanism in the short term.
Oh, wow. So someone is losing.
Yes. It means leverage, resources, and capital are actively hemorrhaging from one demographic and being aggressively captured by another.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we're looking at a historical wealth transfer, that implies a very clear divide.
The snark divide.
Right. There is a demographic that is bleeding out and a demographic that is quietly building the aqueducts to catch the blood.
That's a dark way to put it, but yeah, it's accurate.
And the document paints a very intense psychological portrait of this divide. It claims that 99% of the population is experiencing sheer paralysis.
Total deer in the headlight.
Exactly. They are terrified of obsolescence.
Yeah.
But the remaining 1% are looking at the exact same technological shift and treating it as the ultimate leverage.
The ultimate leverage to build empires.
Right, empires that require absolutely zero employees.
And the divergence in psychology there is the most critical variable. What's fascinating here is how the vast majority of the workforce looks at a large language model.
How do they look at it?
Well, they immediately filter it through the lens of their specific job description. Like the junior copywriter looks at it and asks, will this write the ad copy better than me?
Right. Am I fired?
Yeah. Or the financial analyst asks, can this build a pivot table faster than me? Because their entire economic survival is tied to a specific task.
So they view the automation of that task as an existential threat.
Exactly. They view AI as a replacement for labor.
But the 1% aren't looking at it as labor replacement. I mean, they're looking at it completely differently.
Not at all. The 1% are viewing it as structural leverage. They aren't asking if the machine can do their job.
They're thinking bigger.
Much bigger. They are asking, if I remove the friction of hiring, managing, and paying 50 human beings, How vast of an enterprise can I personally direct?
Wow.
They're looking at AI as an infinite, on-demand workforce.
I want to push back on that framing, though.
Hmm.
Let's look closely at this phrase, zero-employee empire,
Mhm.
because honestly, it sounds like marketing jargon.
It does sound flashy, yeah.
Right. Historically, if you wanted to build an empire like a logistics company, a media conglomerate, or a software firm, human capital wasn't just a byproduct.
No, it was the engine.
It was the essential engine. You couldn't scale without mass hiring. So, are we actually looking at a reality where a single individual can match the output of a traditional corporation?
Or is it just romanticizing the solo entrepreneur?
Exactly. Is the text just hyping up the gig economy?
Well, we have to analyze the fundamental friction of a traditional corporation to understand why this is a reality and not just romanticism.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Think about what happens when a company scales to, say, 500 employees. You don't just get 500 units of output.
Now, you get a lot of headaches.
You inherit massive operational drag. You need HR departments to manage disputes. You need middle management to translate the CEO's vision into actionable tasks for the junior staff.
Bureaucracy just explodes.
It explodes. You have payroll taxes, healthcare premiums, office leases, sick days, and just the inherent communication breakdown that happens when information passes through 5 different human filters.
So the overhead of just keeping the humans organized starts to cost more than the actual product being created.
Precisely.
Yeah.
A massive percentage of corporate energy is spent just maintaining the bureaucracy of the corporation itself.
Just keeping the lights on and the people from quitting.
Right. And what the text is pointing out is that a zero-employee empire completely bypasses all of that friction.
Because there's no bureaucracy to maintain.
None. You have a single human architect who defines the strategy and a constellation of AI agents that execute the tasks instantaneously.
It's just crazy to wrap your head around.
There is no middle management. There is no communication degradation. It is a direct, frictionless pipeline from human intent to digital execution.
Maximum profit retention.
And zero organizational drag.
See, that makes the paralysis of the 99% even more fascinating to me.
Yeah.
If this frictionless pipeline is just sitting there on a server, accessible to literally anyone with Wi-Fi,
Just waiting to be used.
why is the middle class clinging to the legacy system?
Yeah.
You have people who are essentially volunteering to be on the losing side of this wealth transfer.
Showing up to their cubicles.
Yeah, showing up to the office, drinking the stale coffee, hoping the algorithm doesn't notice them during the next round of layoffs. And then you have the 1% operating with this absolute ruthless urgency.
It's a huge behavioral gap.
Why the gap? What is driving that?
You really have to look at how the global workforce has been conditioned for the last 100 years.
Hence the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. Since then, security has been inextricably linked to an institution. You pledge your loyalty to a corporation, a union, or a government apparatus.
And in return, they take care of you?
In theory, yes. That institution shelters you from the brutal volatility of the free market.
Right.
So the idea of untethering from that massive institutional ship and relying entirely on your own ability to direct an AI system, well, it feels reckless to most people.
It feels like jumping out of a plane without a parachute.
Exactly. It violates a century of cultural programming.
But the author of this document is arguing that the institutional ship is already sinking. The safety is a total mirage.
It's completely fake security. The 1% recognize that true economic security in 2024 doesn't come from a W-2. It comes from owning the means of production.
And the means of production has shifted.
Radically.
Yeah.
It is no longer a steel mill in Pittsburgh or a manufacturing plant in Shenzhen.
Right.
The means of production is a digital neural network that costs $20 a month to access.
Let that sink in. $20 a month. So if you are listening to this right now and you are starting to realize that your W-2 might actually be the riskiest asset you hold,
Which it is.
you have to undergo a complete psychological reset.
Yeah.
You have to totally abandon the legacy rules of how capital is generated.
Rip the Band-Aid off entirely.
Exactly. Which leads us into the first major pillar of the source document, the death of the legacy system. And the text is totally unapologetic here.
Very blunt.
It explicitly states that trading time for money is a legacy system.
And the choice of the word legacy there is very deliberate.
In like a software sense?
Yes. In software engineering, a legacy system isn't necessarily broken yet. It's an outdated piece of architecture that is still running, still processing data.
Like an old Windows 95 computer.
Right. But it is fundamentally incapable of interacting with newer, exponentially faster protocols. Eventually, it becomes a massive bottleneck and has to be ripped out.
Oh, wow. And the author is applying that exact engineering concept to the human labor market.
Exactly.
Well, let's test that theory, because there are a lot of highly paid professionals listening to this. Lawyers, specialist programmers, consultants, who still operate on a billable hour model.
Sure, high-ticket hourly work.
Right. They're trading time for money at a very high rate. Is the document really suggesting that a senior corporate lawyer billing, say, $800 an hour is running a legacy system,
Absolutely.
even at that income level?
Yes, because even at $800 an hour, that lawyer's output is governed by a strict biological hard cap.
Ah, biology.
Right. They require 8 hours of sleep. They experience cognitive fatigue after drafting contracts for 6 hours straight. They need to eat lunch.
Exactly. They can only read and synthesize case law at the speed of human ocular processing. Their income, no matter how high the hourly rate, has a hard ceiling defined by human biology.
And the AI doesn't have that ceiling.
Not at all. The AI can ingest 10,000 pages of case law, cross-reference it against a century of legal precedent, and draft a flawless 40-page contract in 14 seconds.
In 14 seconds. And it can do that simultaneously for 500 different clients at 3 in the morning without ever asking for a coffee break.
That is the crux of the argument right there. You simply cannot compete with instantaneous, infinite execution by trading your biological time.
It's mathematically impossible.
If your economic model requires you to be awake and actively focused to generate revenue, you are running a system that is doomed to be outpaced.
Doomed. But the text pairs this concept of the dying legacy system with a new paradigm it calls permissionless leverage.
Pillar 1.
Right. Now, I have a major issue with this term, just looking at it critically.
Okay, let's hear it. If we look at the history of capitalism, leverage has never, ever been permissionless.
It's always had strings attached.
Always. It has always been heavily guarded by gatekeepers. If you wanted leverage to scale a business 10 years ago, you had to pitch a venture capital firm or beg a bank for a commercial loan.
Or convince a board of directors that you were worth the risk.
Exactly. You needed the gatekeepers of capital to grant you the permission to hire the humans required to build the thing. Are we really supposed to believe that AI has entirely dissolved the gatekeepers overnight?
It's a profound structural shift, but the logic holds up if you look at where the capital used to actually go.
Where did it go?
Well, why did you need the venture capital in the first place?
I-
If you were starting a software company in 2014, you needed $3 million for a seed round, primarily to pay the salaries of software engineers, UI designers, QA testers.
Right, the human payroll.
Exactly. And product managers for 18 months before you even had a viable product to sell. The capital was required to secure the human labor.
So the money was just a proxy for renting human brainpower.
Precisely. But today, the AI acts as the senior developer, the designer, and the QA tester. The cost of that labor has collapsed from a massive payroll to an API usage fee that might total $50 a month.
$50 versus $3 million.
Yes. Therefore, the requirement for venture capital vanishes. You don't need a bank's permission to spin up a server and deploy an AI agent to write your code base.
Because it's practically free.
Exactly. The leverage is permissionless because the barrier to accessing world-class cognitive labor requires zero capital permission.
I see the logic, but, well, that assumes a massive blind spot in the market. Let's look at the flip side of this permissionless leverage.
Okay.
If the barrier to entry has truly dropped to zero, if literally anyone with an internet connection can instantly access a supercomputer to write code, design graphics, and build software,
Yeah.
doesn't the value of all that output immediately crash to zero?
Because of the flood of supply.
Right. If everyone can build a tech company from their laptop on a Tuesday afternoon, we're going to have 10 million identical tech companies by Wednesday.
That's a valid concern.
How does the 1% actually build an empire if there's no moat to protect them from infinite competition?
And that is the most critical paradox of this entire shift. When the cost of producing something drops to zero, the market is immediately flooded with infinite supply.
An ocean of noise.
We are about to see an absolute tsunami of mediocre software, AI-generated content, and automated services. But that doesn't mean the value of all output drops to zero.
It doesn't.
No, it means the nature of the economic moat completely changes.
So if the moat isn't access to capital, and it isn't access to cheap labor, what is it? What protects the 1%?
The new moat is taste, strategy, and curation.
Taste.
Yes. When anyone can generate 1,000 variations of a product in an hour, the premium is no longer on the ability to create the product.
Because the machine creates it.
Right. The premium shifts entirely to the individual who knows exactly which of those 1,000 variations actually solves a human
Oh,
problem.
that's interesting. It's like the difference between having access to a piano and knowing how to compose a symphony.
That is the perfect analogy. The 1% aren't just using AI to blast infinite noise into the market. They are using it to execute highly sophisticated, hyper-targeted strategies.
Which brings up a terrifying implication for the corporate world.
The white-collar workers.
Yeah. If the premium is entirely on the architect, the person with the taste and the strategy and the AI handles all the execution. What happens to the massive tier of the workforce whose entire professional existence is based on executing tasks?
The executors.
Right. If I'm a junior analyst and my whole job is taking a strategic directive from my boss and spending 3 days building the Excel models to execute it, where do I fit into a zero-employee empire?
The brutal reality the document points to is that the execution-only demographic is being economically eviscerated.
Eviscerated. Just wiped out.
Yes. The people sitting in the middle of the corporate hierarchy, the email forwarding middle class, the junior copywriters, the mid-level logistics coordinators, they are standing on a trap door.
Waiting for someone to pull the lever.
Exactly. They aren't architects, and they aren't physically manipulating the real world like a plumber or an electrician. They are information processors.
And silicon processes information infinitely faster, cheaper, and more accurately than biology.
It's not even a competition anymore.
So we have this landscape where the old gatekeepers are gone, the friction of human labor is dissolving, but the market is about to be flooded with infinite noise.
It's a very chaotic landscape.
Very. And having access to the machine clearly isn't enough. If you sit a random person in the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, they're going to crash it before they even get off the runway.
They wouldn't even know how to turn it on.
Right. You have to know how to fly the thing. You need the new mechanics of this economic warfare. And this takes us directly into pillar 2 of the text high-income AI skills.
And the document doesn't just theorize here. It provides a highly specific roadmap.
It gives you the actual tools.
Yes. It identifies that the highest paid individuals in this new economy are not the AI researchers building the models.
Wait, really? Not the engineers at OpenAI?
No, it's the operators who can bridge the gap between raw, latent AI capabilities and actual measurable business needs.
Okay, so they aren't doing the work. They are the interface.
The translators.
Yeah. I keep thinking about this not as a user of a software, but as a director. It's like you're this highly paid director standing between a phenomenally powerful but entirely amnesiac actor and a legacy corporation that needs a blockbuster movie but has no idea how to write a script.
The director analogy is far more accurate than thinking of it as a search engine, and the text outlines 3 specific skills required to be that director.
Let's go through them.
The first, and arguably the most foundational, is prompt engineering.
Now, prompt engineering is a term that gets thrown around on LinkedIn a lot, usually by people trying to sell you a PDF of like 100 ChatGPT hacks.
Yeah. Oh, constantly. It's become a huge buzzword.
It sounds like a gimmick. The text defines it as mastering the language of AI. But we all know LLMs speak plain English. You just type in what you want. Why is this considered a high-income, highly technical skill?
Because typing what you want is how you get generic, highly detectable AI slop.
It's stuff that sounds like a robot wrote it.
Exactly. An amateur treats an LLM like a slot machine. They pull the lever with a basic prompt like, write a sales email for my landscaping business, and just hope the output is good.
And it usually comes out sounding completely hollow.
Right. But a true prompt engineer understands the underlying architecture of a neural network. They know that an LLM is essentially a massive probability engine, predicting the next token based on its training data.
Okay, so it's just guessing the next word.
Basically, so if you give it a generic input, it will traverse the most generic, highly trodden pathways in its neural net, resulting in a bland, average output.
So how does the architect force the machine out of those generic pathways? How do they get the good stuff?
By heavily constraining the probability space.
Constraining it.
Yes. A master prompt engineer doesn't just ask for an output. They architect a cognitive environment.
Wow, okay.
They define the persona with excruciating detail. They establish the exact constraints of the format. They inject specific frameworks for logical reasoning, like forcing the AI to use a chain of thought process before generating the final answer.
So they're telling it how to think, not just what to say.
Precisely. They might use few-shot prompting, providing 3 highly specific examples of the desired tone and syntax, essentially fine-tuning the model's behavior in real time within the context window.
It's the difference between telling an actor, be sad, versus telling them, you are a mid-level executive who just realized you've wasted 10 years of your life, the lighting is harsh, you can't make eye contact, and I want to see the realization hit you over the course of 3 seconds without speaking.
That is exactly it. You are dictating the exact parameters of the performance.
And that gets a completely different result.
Completely different. And when you master that level of parameter control, the output ceases to look like AI. It becomes indistinguishable from top-tier human expertise.
So that's the moat.
That is the moat. The ability to extract that level of utility consistently is why prompt engineering is a premium skill.
But, okay, even if you are the greatest prompt engineer on Earth, if you are sitting there manually typing prompts into an interface one by one, copying the output and pasting it into an email, you are still trading your time for an output.
You're just a faster typist at that.
Right. You're just a faster manual laborer. And that's where the document introduces the second critical skill, AI automation.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It specifically names tools like Zapier and Make.
Yeah.
Let's get into the actual mechanics of this, because this is where the zero employee concept really crystallizes for me.
To understand AI automation, you have to stop thinking about AI as a chatbot.
Okay.
You have to start thinking about it as an invisible cognitive routing system.
A routing system.
Yes. Tools like Zapier and Make are integration platforms. They allow entirely different software ecosystems to talk to each other via APIs, application programming interfaces.
I always tell people to think of the API as a universal plug socket on the back of every modern piece of software.
That's a great way to visualize it. Now, historically, moving data between those sockets required rigid formatting.
The data had to be perfect.
Right. But the real world is messy. An email from a client isn't perfectly formatted data, it's unstructured text. What the 1% are doing is using AI as the translator between the messy human world and the rigid software world.
Let's walk through a concrete example of how this actually looks in practice for someone running one of these automated empires, bring it down to reality for us.
Sure, imagine you run an automated digital marketing agency. A potential client fills out a messy, rambling contact form on your website.
We've all seen those. Half sentences, typos.
Exactly. In the legacy system, a human account manager reads that email, tries to decipher what the client actually wants, checks the calendar, drafts a response, and manually builds a pricing quote in Word.
That takes, what, hours?
Hours. And it introduces human error, bias, and delay.
So what happens in the new system?
In the automated system, the moment that contact form is submitted, a webhook, which is basically a digital tripwire, sends that raw, unstructured text to an AI via API.
Instantly.
Instantly. The AI has been engineered with a specific prompt. You are an intake analyst. Read this unstructured text. Extract the client's budget, their core problem, and their timeline. Format this data strictly as a JSON file.
And JSON is just a lightweight data interchange format that other software can easily read. So it's turning a messy human paragraph into neat labeled boxes of data.
Exactly. The AI structures the data in 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Then Make.com takes that JSON payload and writes it simultaneously to 3 different places.
Oh, it splits it up.
Yes. It sends the data to another AI model specialized in copywriting, which drafts a custom, highly personalized proposal based on the exact problem the client described.
Wow.
It sends the budget data to a dynamic pricing tool to generate a quote. It routes everything to a third AI that formats it into a beautifully branded PDF.
Yeah.
Finally, the system drafts a polite email, attaches the PDF, and sends it back to the client.
So the client receives a deeply researched, perfectly formatted, customized proposal 4 minutes after they hit submit.
Yes, and the human architect of this system was asleep the entire time.
That is just, it's mind-blowing.
That is AI automation. It's not a conveyor belt, it's a digital circulatory system. The webhook is the artery, the structured data is the blood, and the LLM is the organ processing it.
So the skill is knowing how to design the anatomy of the system.
Precisely. Once it's built, it runs infinitely with zero marginal cost.
Which leads directly into the third skill, the document mandates content syndication.
Because you have to get people in the door.
Right, because you can have those beautifully automated digital agency in the world, but if nobody knows you exist, your APIs are just sitting there gathering dust.
They're useless without traffic.
In the modern economy, attention is the only prerequisite to capital. If you don't have eyeballs, you don't have a business.
Attention is the absolute currency of 2024. But capturing attention historically required an army.
A whole media team.
Exactly. If you wanted to be omnipresent, if you wanted high-quality essays on LinkedIn, viral threads on Twitter, engaging videos on TikTok, and a deeply researched weekly newsletter, you had to build a media company.
You needed writers to draft the copy, editors to refine it.
Video editors to cut the footage, and social media managers to schedule the distribution. The human friction to maintain omnipresence was astronomical.
And the document is saying that content syndication through AI collapses all of that friction into a single operator.
Completely collapses it.
Let's look at the mechanics of how you actually achieve the footprint of a legacy media conglomerate from a laptop in a coffee shop. How are they doing this?
The architecture of AI syndication relies on a hub-and-spoke model of content generation.
Hub and spoke.
Yes. The human architect only needs to provide the core intellectual property, the raw idea, the unique insight, or the strategic thesis. That is the hub.
So like the original thought.
Right. Let's say it's a 10-minute voice memo recording of your thoughts on supply chain logistics.
You're just talking to your phone while walking the dog.
Exactly. You feed that raw audio into an AI transcription tool. Then you route that transcript through a series of specialized LLMs, each instructed with a unique prompt template.
Like the prompt engineering we just talked about.
Exactly. One AI is tasked with identifying the 3 most controversial points and expanding them into a high-engagement Twitter thread.
Okay.
Another AI is instructed to rewrite the entire transcript in the professional corporate tone of a LinkedIn thought leadership article.
Wow.
A third AI extracts the most narrative-driven segment and formats it into a hook-heavy script for a YouTube short.
So you aren't asking the AI to invent ideas out of thin air, which usually results in that generic slop we talked about earlier.
Never ask it to invent the core idea.
You are using the AI purely as a formatting and translation engine for your original human insight.
Precisely. You maintain the moat of human taste and original thought, but you completely eliminate the labor of formatting and distribution.
So you just review it and post it.
You review the outputs, approve them, and push them to an automated scheduling tool. In 1 hour of work, a single individual has generated a week's worth of multi-platform media inventory.
You achieve massive asymmetric visibility.
Asymmetric leverage.
You know, what's fascinating here is how these 3 skills compound on each other.
They interlock perfectly.
Right. If you can engineer the constraints of the AI to get elite output, and you can automate the workflow so the digital circulatory system runs on its own,
Yeah.
and you can syndicate your message to capture global attention, you have essentially built a perpetual motion machine for capital.
A wealth-generating engine that runs itself.
And this transitions us directly into the territory where the traditional 9-to-5 mindset completely short-circuits. We are talking about Pillar 3 of the source document architecting passive income.
The document refers to AI in this section as the ultimate employee that never sleeps.
That phrase gives me chills. But we need to look at the phrase passive income very critically here, because for the last 2 decades, passive income has been heavily diluted by internet marketers selling courses on dropshipping or affiliate blogs.
It became a dirty word.
It did. It was largely a pipe dream that actually required massive amounts of ongoing active maintenance.
Right. The reality of passive income in 2015 usually meant you were frantically managing overseas suppliers and dealing with thousands of angry customer service emails.
It was just a different, worse job.
Exactly. But the text argues that AI has shifted passive income from a marketing myth into a structural engineering reality.
Because of the tech.
Because of the fundamental difference between biological labor and machine execution. If we connect this to the bigger picture, a human employee is bound by circadian rhythms.
We get tired.
Right. They clock in, they experience cognitive degradation by 2:00 p.m., they log off at 5:00 p.m., they require weekends to psychologically recover, and they take vacations.
They get sick.
Exactly. An automated AI workflow operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It never tires, it never asks for a raise, and its execution is mathematically consistent at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday.
It is entirely relentless. And the document doesn't just leave it at theory. It outlines 3 highly specific models the 1% are currently deploying to harness this relentless employee.
They are executing this right now.
The first one is AI-driven SaaS, or software as a service. Now, the text describes this as creating simple tools that solve specific problems.
Microsoft.
Let's dig into the reality of building software today versus 5 years ago, because the compression of the development cycle is staggering.
It's a completely different world. 5 years ago, if you identified a problem in a niche market, let's say real estate agents struggling to write listing descriptions,
Okay, a common problem.
and you wanted to build a SaaS product to solve it, you were looking at a monumental undertaking. You needed to hire a front-end developer, a back-end engineer, a database architect.
The whole team.
You had to endure months of development sprints, QA testing, and bug squashing. It required hundreds of thousands of dollars before a single customer ever saw the product.
You had to build the entire engine from scratch.
But today, the foundational models, the massive LLMs built by OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they're the engine. You don't need to build the intelligence. You just need to rent access to it via API.
Let's plug into it.
Exactly. And with AI coding assistants like Cursor or GitHub Copilot, a single individual with minimal traditional coding experience can act as a senior product manager.
They just direct the AI.
Yes.
Yeah.
They use natural language to instruct the AI to write the boilerplate code, build the user interface, and connect the API endpoints.
I want to challenge the longevity of this, though. Because what you were describing is essentially building a wrapper.
A wrapper, yes.
You are wrapping a neat little user interface around someone else's foundational model. If I build a micro SaaS that helps real estate agents write descriptions using the OpenAI API, aren't I entirely at the mercy of OpenAI?
That's the fear.
The moment they update ChatGPT to have a native real estate feature, my entire business goes to zero instantly. Is a wrapper actually a viable empire?
That is the most common critique of micro-SaaS, but it misunderstands the actual friction in the B2B market.
How so?
Businesses don't want to log into ChatGPT, paste in a prompt, copy the output, and format it themselves. They want a solution integrated directly into their existing workflow.
They want convenience.
Exactly. The value of the wrapper isn't the AI intelligence. The value is the workflow hyper-specificity.
Okay, that makes sense.
If your real estate SaaS integrates directly into their MLS database, pulls the property specs automatically, generates the description, and auto-publishes it to Zillow with one click, OpenAI updating their generic chatbot doesn't threaten you.
Because OpenAI doesn't have the MLS access.
Exactly. You aren't selling intelligence. You are selling the elimination of workflow friction. And an individual can build and deploy that friction killer in 48 hours.
It's insane velocity. Spot a bottleneck on Monday, use AI to code the solution on Tuesday, integrate Stripe for payments on Wednesday, and have automated subscription revenue flowing by Friday.
That is the new timeline.
But if writing code, even AI-assisted code, isn't your trajectory, the document highlights a second, much more visible model: faceless content channels.
These are everywhere right now.
It points to the use of AI for scripts, voiceovers, and editing, and specifically names a channel called LifeVanta as a case study.
The faceless content channel is perhaps the most visceral demonstration of the wealth transfer occurring in the attention economy.
It really is.
We are looking at the advent of entirely synthetic media pipelines. Historically, being a successful YouTube creator required immense human presence and labor.
You had to be the star.
You had to be charismatic on camera, set up lighting, record multiple takes, manually scrub through hours of footage in Premiere Pro, balance the audio, and design thumbnails.
The human was the ultimate bottleneck.
You had to literally trade your physical energy to entertain the algorithm.
Right. But the synthetic pipeline completely removes the human from the creative execution.
Entirely.
Let's break down how a channel like the LifeVanta example actually functions structurally. How are they doing this?
Well, the human architect writes a Python script that scrapes YouTube and TikTok data to identify highly viral, underserved topics in a specific niche, say, Stoic philosophy or personal finance.
So they don't even brainstorm ideas. The machine finds the demand before it even exists.
Precisely. The system automatically feeds that trending topic into an LLM, which has been prompt engineered to write a high-retention, hook-driven script.
Okay.
That text is immediately routed via API to a text-to-speech engine like 11 Labs. And we aren't talking about the robotic, stuttering text-to-speech of 2018.
Right, doesn't sound like old Siri.
No, we are talking about hyper-realistic, emotionally nuanced audio, complete with synthesized breaths and natural inflection.
It sounds more articulate and engaging than most actual humans.
It does. Next, the audio file is pushed to an AI video generator or an automated editing software.
Automatically.
Automatically. The software analyzes the pacing of the audio, automatically pulls perfectly matched, high-quality stock footage or generates custom AI visuals, adds dynamic subtitles, applies color grading, and exports the final 4K video.
That is incredible.
It can even auto-generate the title, the description, and the thumbnail, and push it directly to the YouTube API to be published.
So you have a digital asset that lives on the internet forever, capturing views, generating YouTube ad revenue, pushing viewers to affiliate links, and acting as a permanent digital salesperson.
Earning while you sleep.
And the human creator never stepped in front of a camera, never spoken to a microphone, and never opened a video editing timeline. They just built the factory and turned it on.
It is the ultimate manifestation of permissionless leverage. You are manufacturing high-value digital real estate at an absolute zero marginal cost.
So you can just scale it infinitely.
A single architect can run 20 different channels in 20 different niches across 10 different languages simultaneously.
Unbelievable. And then there's the third model outlined in Pillar 3, which honestly feels like the most aggressive, almost predatory application of this technology.
Yes, automated trading and arbitrage.
The text keeps this section brief, stating simply, leveraging AI to identify market inefficiencies. But if we look at the mechanics of what AI is actually doing in financial markets right now, it is terrifying for the retail investor.
It is. We have to understand that modern financial markets are fundamentally just massive information processing engines.
Just numbers moving around.
The entire game is who can ingest the most unstructured data, identify a mispricing in an asset, and execute a trade to capture that margin the fastest.
Right. And for decades, this was dominated by massive quantitative hedge funds with supercomputers co-located right next to the stock exchange.
The Wall Street giants.
But the document is suggesting this leverage is now accessible to the individual. How does an individual compete in a market where hedge funds are laying fiber optic cables through mountains just to shave a microsecond off a trade?
Well, the individual isn't competing on nanosecond latency. They're competing on asynchronous, automated analysis of unstructured data.
What does that mean in plain English?
Let's look at earnings season. A retail trader, the human using the legacy system, has to wait for the earnings report to be published, read through a 30-page PDF, listen to the CEO's tone on a conference call, synthesize what it all means, and then manually click buy or sell on their brokerage app.
Which takes way too long.
Yeah.
By the time their brain has processed the information, the opportunity is gone. The big money has already moved.
Biology is just too slow. But an AI arbitrage system operates entirely differently. The human architect builds a workflow where an LLM is directly plugged into the live transcript feed of the earnings call.
Right into the feed.
Yes, the AI isn't just reading, it is running real-time natural language processing on the CEO's syntax. It detects a subtle negative shift in the forward-looking guidance that the broader market hasn't fully digested yet.
So it understands the context of the words faster than a human can even hear them.
And because it is connected via API to a brokerage account, the moment it detects that negative sentiment threshold, it executes a short position.
Instantly.
It shorts the stock, the market digests the news 3 minutes later, the stock drops, the AI closes the position, and captures a 4% profit.
Wow.
The entire life cycle of the trade happens without a human ever reading a single word of the report. It is an algorithm ruthlessly hunting for inefficiencies while the architect is asleep.
Man, if we step back and look at these three models, the microso SaaS, solving workflow friction, the synthetic media machines capturing global attention, and the automated trading algorithms extracting capital from market inefficiencies, we see a picture of the 1% building absolute fortresses of automated wealth. They have armies of tireless, hyper-intelligent digital workers continuously accumulating wealth for them in the background. But I want to bring the focus forcefully back to you, the listener.
This is the crucial part.
Because if this massive apparatus of wealth accumulation is humming in the background for the architects, what is the mathematical reality for the people ignoring it?
That's crap.
If you are sitting in your cubicle right now, hoping this is just a tech fad like the metaverse or NFTs, hoping you can just ride out your legacy career to retirement, what is the trajectory of your life over the next 36 months?
That trajectory is the focus of Pillar 4, which the author aptly titles The Survival Guide.
Survival Guide. They aren't messing around.
No. The text offers a chillingly clear prognosis. It says, if you ignore AI, you are not just staying still. You are actively falling behind. Businesses that don't integrate AI will become obsolete.
Let's avoid the cliche analogies here. It's not just a sinking ship or a rising tide.
Right. It's like being on a sinking ship where the cost of bailing water, which is human labor, is getting more expensive by the minute, and right next to you is a free speedboat, which is the AI. If you don't get on the speedboat, you're literally choosing to drown.
Choosing to drown. Let's look at the actual economic mechanism of how a middle-class job evaporates, because it doesn't usually happen overnight with a dramatic robot walking into your office to take your desk.
No, it's not Terminator.
It happens through a slow, suffocating squeeze on your economic value.
And the document identifies the precise mechanism of this squeeze. It states a fundamental law of the 2024 economy. The cost of labor is increasing, while the cost of AI intelligence is decreasing.
The squeeze.
If we map this out, it is a devastating intersection for the white-collar worker.
Okay, let's map it for everyone listening.
On one axis, you have the human worker. Due to inflation, rising housing costs, and the general cost of biological survival, the human worker must constantly demand higher wages just to maintain their standard of living.
Groceries cost more, rent is up, so I need a raise.
Exactly. The corporate cost of retaining human labor goes up every single year.
Okay, and the other axis.
On the other axis, you have the cost of compute. Thanks to Moore's law and massive leaps in algorithmic efficiency, the cost to generate 1 million tokens of high-level cognitive output from an LLM collapses by an order of magnitude every 12 months.
Wow, so the human is getting inherently more expensive, and the machine is getting exponentially cheaper, faster, and smarter.
Exactly. And we have to confront the paradox of automation, often called Moravec's paradox.
What's that?
Well, for decades, we assumed the robots would come for the blue-collar, physical jobs first. We thought they would replace the plumbers, the carpenters, the electricians.
Like manual labor.
But manipulating the physical world in unpredictable environments is incredibly difficult for a machine. A robot that can walk up a flight of stairs, diagnose a leaking pipe in a cramped cabinet, and perfectly solder a joint is a multi-million-dollar robotics problem.
We aren't there yet. But the cognitive work, the very work that was supposed to be the safe haven for the educated middle class, is incredibly easy to automate.
That is the terrifying irony.
The physical world is hard for robots.
But the digital world generating text, analyzing data, writing code, moving information from one database to another, that is the native environment of the AI.
It lives there.
Yes. The junior financial analyst earning $90,000 a year to build Excel models is infinitely easier and cheaper to replace than the plumber earning $60,000 a year to fix a toilet.
Let's really hammer this home for the listener. If your daily work involves sitting at a screen, taking information from one source, processing it through your brain, and outputting it to another screen,
You are in the crosshairs.
you are currently being priced out of existence. It doesn't matter how prestigious your degree is. It doesn't matter how loyal you have been to the firm. A corporation is a sociopathic organism designed entirely to maximize profit.
It is a mathematical certainty.
Right.
When a CEO or a board of directors looks at the P&L statement, they see the converging lines. They see an expanding human payroll fraught with friction, HR disputes, and limited biological output.
And right next to it.
They see an AI infrastructure that costs a fraction of a percent of that payroll, operates continuously, and improves its cognitive abilities every single quarter.
It's a no-brainer for them.
It is not a matter of if the corporate structure will replace the execution tier workers. It is only a matter of the integration timeline.
It's happening now.
The obsolescence is not theoretical. It is actively happening right now.
We have spent this deep dive mapping out a pretty brutal landscape today.
Very brutal.
We've torn down the illusion of the legacy 9-to-5. We've exposed the vulnerability of the email forwarding middle class. And we've unpacked the incredible structural leverage that the 1% are currently weaponizing.
And it is an incredibly intimidating picture.
It really is. But if you understand the architecture of what is happening, it is also the most empowering moment in economic history.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the ultimate binary choice presented at the conclusion of the source document.
The author doesn't mince words in the conclusion. The text functions as an aggressive ultimatum. The barrier to entry has never been lower. To escape the 9-to-5 trap, you must stop being a consumer of AI and start being a producer.
That is the psychological pivot we talked about at the very beginning. You have to evaluate your relationship with this technology today.
Right now.
Are you just a consumer? Are you scrolling through AI-generated images on social media, marveling at the novelty of it? Are you using ChatGPT as a glorified thesaurus to rewrite your polite emails to your manager?
That is pure consumer behavior.
Exactly. You are playing with the interface while the 1% are hijacking the back end. You have to step behind the curtain. You have to start architecting the workflows.
The document leaves us with a brutal, unavoidable synthesis. It says, build your AI system today or serve the people who did.
Man, that hits hard.
This is the reality of the wealth transfer. There is no neutral territory left. You cannot sit on the fence and hope the storm passes.
There is no fence.
No fence. You are either the architect wielding the permissionless leverage, actively building a zero-employee empire, or you are the increasingly obsolete labor force being crushed by it, serving the fractional percentage of people who had the foresight to take action.
So what does this all actually mean for you? It means this deep dive wasn't just an exploration of some fascinating tech trends. This is an economic survival manual.
A literal survival guide for the next decade.
The most significant wealth transfer in human history isn't scheduled for a decade from now. It's happening right now, silently, in the background of the internet, while the majority of the population is distracted by their next performance review or their weekend plans.
And the window to be an early adopter is inherently limited.
It's closing.
Fast. Right now, there is an arbitrage opportunity because the vast majority of legacy corporations and individual workers are still paralyzed by fear or ignorance. They don't know how to build the digital circulatory systems yet.
But that knowledge gap will close.
It will. The time to build the leverage is while the rest of the market is still trying to figure out what the machine does.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply provocative reality to consider as we wrap up.
The big question.
If we play this out to its logical conclusion, if the barrier to entry to build complex software, generate global media, and analyze financial markets has dropped to near zero, and if human cognitive labor for execution is entirely phased out by relentless algorithms, what becomes the premium asset? If the machine can write, code, design, and analyze infinitely faster and better than you ever could, what is your unique human value?
It's the ultimate existential question.
In a world drowning in infinite, perfectly executed cognitive supply, the most valuable human traits will no longer be intelligence or efficiency.
No, the machines won that game.
Exactly. The new premiums will be extreme human taste, deep philosophical discernment, and the ability to foster genuine, unscalable human connection in the physical world. The robots have taken the digital high ground. Your job now is to find out what it truly means to be human in a closed labor economy and build your leverage before your 9-to-5 disappears into the server racks completely. Keep diving, and we'll see you next time.